It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good afternoon, all. Craig, I'd like to start with you. There have been literally hundreds of new executive orders and policy changes and legislative initiatives since Joe Biden took office a few days ago. But it seems like Washington is really fixated on two primary issues. One is the Biden 1.9 trillion COVID relief bill. And the second one, as you all know, is the impeachment trial of Donald Trump in the Senate. I want to talk first about the odds of getting the COVID bill passed in Congress now that the Democrats have the very slight majority that they do have.
So I think, first of all, the agenda has gotten crowded. I think that one of the concerns I have has less to do with the substance coming out of the White House than just the kind of cacophony of spokespeople on different topics. We go from climate change to COVID, to the economy, to equality, to the Iranians. And one of the things that is so difficult in any White House is to control the message because many things are coming at you. But in this White House, they seem to be generating, multiple themes every day. I'm sure there was a committee that went to work that talked about the important messages they wanted to get out. But the point is you get them out in a carefully laid strategy, not all at once. When I go through the kind of the review of headlines in any one of the major publications that we all look at, they're all over the place. And actually, many of the headlines don't have the Biden administration in the lead, which, coming back to your question, is one of the disadvantages they have. There is a very strong majority of the American people who believe there should be additional rounds of COVID relief. Wherever you may fall on that policy, there's clearly a mandate to do something in that area, but it's going to take a lot of focus of the administration. And while they have to work on a lot of other areas, that's one theme it seems to me they should be driving day in and day out if they want to get there. And of course, the other part of the COVID equation is the actual vaccines. They're still, it seems to me, maybe I'm just because I'm sitting in Maryland, leaving an awful lot to the governors. Today they had their, in the middle of the week, they had their first major briefing of the COVID experts, and that looked like it might be the lead story until they introduced John Kerry to talk about climate change and his role. And so I guess my point is that they're going to reduce their ability to drive things through Congress if they don't get better control over the message and stop letting one messenger after another go into that White House press room and hold a press briefing.
Al, what's your perspective on this one?
Well, I guess I have a little bit different perspective because I do think the COVID issue is just greater than all the rest put together. Actually, I'm quite optimistic that Congress is going to pass a COVID relief bill, and I honestly think it'll have bipartisan support. Now, the final package isn't going to have everything President Biden asked for, but I suspect it'll have the things that he considers most important. One of the things in this age of instant gratification sparked by Twitter and cable television is all the commentators say if you don't get what you want in the first 48 hours, your bills are dead on arrival. I think that's nonsense. The president wants a bipartisan bill. That requires negotiations, as Craig and I know well, because we've been in plenty of them. And that takes time, and there's give and take. The president said earlier this week that compromises come at the end of the process, not at the very beginning. So I'm sure as we look at the COVID bill, the president has included provisions that he's willing to give up, and he's indicated there are places he'd compromise. Just one example is he's asked for $1,400 for every person basically in America who makes under $300,000. That's why you have a price tag of 1.9 trillion. Uh, a lot of people on both sides have suggested better targeting. And if you just went down to people who made 75,000, people who really need it, you'd cut that price a lot and probably be able to get some people in the middle on both sides to be on that bill. You know, President Trump really ruined us in a sense, in many ways. But you know, you couldn't have negotiations with him because he'd start a tweet with one position and end it with another. He always even undercut his own negotiators. Now, you know, that's a different thing with Biden. He's been around. He was in the Senate for 36 years. Members on both sides know him and they trust him. And he also understands that there are limits to the majorities Democrats have. And just to go to Craig's point about all the messages, I think there's something strategic about that. A lot of the action has been to things that the left on the party want. And I think he might be maneuvering for a little bit of running room to negotiate a bipartisan bill on the big thing, which is COVID relief. You know, in another era, people would look to Biden as one of Washington's wise men. I think in the end, we're going to all benefit from his wisdom.
Well, I think just for the record, I think that was the first disagreement we've had for the year 2021. Music to my ears.
Hey, you know, but Dave, this is, I think, a really important point, and it is good. Maybe we'll do this more often.
Yeah.
I recently finished the book about James Baker, and in there's a section about how in the very beginning of the Reagan administration in 1981, managing the Secretary of State, Al Haig, was a real challenge. And indeed it was, because Al Haig had an agenda, and it was an important agenda, and he wanted to talk about it every day. But Jim Baker knew if he was going to do spending restraint or control and tax reduction, he could not allow all of the people with important messages to deliver them. And so we absolutely controlled the message. And I only point out that I think that while what President Biden is attempting to do, I don't take exception to really at this stage. I just think it's going to be difficult to do it unless you narrow the message and make sure Congress knows exactly what you want done. Because if you don't do that, they're going to go off in a number of directions as well.
I don't question that, and I think the message will narrow. But you know, when you have a 3-vote majority in the House, and you have a squad of 6 people who are want all these other things, and haven't had any experience in the legislative process, which is another thing about a lot of those people on the left, and particularly the squad. Most of what they want is rhetorical, and a lot of what Biden has done speaks to the rhetoric, but it's not legislative, it's not the law. You sort of say to them, look, we've given you what you want, now let us really focus in on this. So we'll see. I mean, we're only a week in. I think Biden has a lot of really experienced people around him, and that they'll get that message honed pretty much. At least I hope they will.
Al, let me stay with you on the next major issue, which is the House of Representatives marched over to the Senate on Monday and presented the impeachment of Mr. Trump to the Senate. And according to a lot of people, including President Biden, I think, there are not enough votes to convict the former president. So is this a waste of time, as there are only a few GOP senators that have suggested recently?
I guess I don't think it's a waste of time to pursue a trial in the Senate. And my guess, if you talk to most of those Republicans privately, they would say it's not a waste of time either. Look, what President Trump has been charged with are the most serious crimes a president's ever been charged with in the history of the United States. You can't try to incite a riot in the, in the capital of the United States, undercut an election, and then walk away from it without any repercussions. I mean, I listened to all these the Republican happy talk about, well, let's just move on, or let's have unity. Well, it's pretty hard to have unity when you're trying to exonerate and in some cases encourage and vote for in the House on January 6th, the undermining of an election and welcoming Marjorie Greene into your caucus, who has tweeted about wanting to kill Democratic leaders. Give me a break on that. Now, there's no doubt that Trump is very popular with a significant part, even though polls are starting to show a decreasing part of the party, still probably a majority though. So I don't find it particularly surprising that the Republican senators would rather avoid a televised trial or that they'd vote in bloc, really, for a procedural vote to avoid it. But unlike most commentators, and maybe Biden, I'm not absolutely convinced that in the end it'll be impossible to get to 17. Now that's a long stretch, but there's a difference between a procedural vote in this case and a substantive one. There are a lot of times in my legislative times up there that members would use a vote, for example, to a motion to not consider a bill as a way to cover their vote for it when it actually came up. But look, I think most Republicans want to see Trump out of the political arena, and they'd rather do it without confronting him and hope he just faded away. But that didn't work. So here's their choice now, okay? They can exonerate him and give him a new life, or they can convict him and ban him from ever running for office again. That choice is not as clear cut as not considering the trial or convicting. So we'll see what happens.
Greg, the same kind of reaction?
Hey, Dave, we may go 2 for 2 here. I take a little different point of view. I think we're suffering from just sheer Trump fatigue. And honestly, it's felt so good not to wake up every day wondering what the tweet of the morning was, that it's kind of nice, having the former president in Florida. While I agree that it's not a waste of time because there were certainly serious transgressions, and I'm sure that Al and others would feel good to see that a trial go forward in the Senate. I think the outcome looks very unlikely to produce what they might hope for. And I guess at this stage, when these members of the Senate need to find ways to work together, a trial of Trump would just be number one, divisive, and make it more difficult for them to come together on other issues. And secondly, it would give Trump something he craves, which is visibility. Jeb Bush said to me a few years ago that if you really want to do in Trump, just ignore him. And I've thought about that many times since, because I think even bad stories are better for him in his mind than no stories. And I think at this stage, censure would be nice. Maybe there is a way to cop a plea or do something to negotiate an agreement on something lesser. But at this stage, I'd rather see the agenda go forward on the important issues we're facing, try to find a way for some of these Republicans and the Democrats to find paths where they're working together, and just sideline Trump. There are, I will say, people who clearly were engaged in the planning of this disruption, including members of his family, it now appears, who I think should be prosecuted outside of the United States Senate. So I think people should be held to account for what they did. And if we find that Trump played a greater role, it may take us to a different place. But I think for the time being, I'd like to see an agenda go forward that's based on the future, not so much on the past.
I'd like to see an agenda go forward that's based on the future rather than the past, but you don't get there by ignoring the greatest crime ever committed by a president. You just don't get there that way. If your party, if the Republican Party has 146 members who voted after the insurrection to deny the free vote of the American people, you just don't move forward without taking action. I'm sorry. And, you know, there'll be plenty of time to forget Trump. This trial's only going to last a couple of weeks and then he can be off the scene. But if you don't want to impeach him or convict him there, maybe he ought to be brought up. You know, there ought to be charges filed against him and his family in the courts. I think he'd rather be banned from public office than spend the rest of his life in jail.
Craig, I have to give you the last word.
I don't guess I don't feel good about it, but I just don't think we're gonna get there. I do think that the former president is going to be tied up for some time with legal challenge and other problems, and that's as it should be. Let's see where it goes. I just don't see the votes to end the process feeling as good as my friend Al would like to feel.
2 for 2. Craig Fuller, Al Fromm, thanks so much. See you next week.